All right, so last unit we were looking at testing hypotheses. Remember, we had the null hypothesis, we had the alternate hypotheses, but there was only one variable. Now we're going to be looking at later on into two variables. So we're going to be looking at two populations that we're going to study. The C-score table that we've been using, I'm not going to provide it in these notes because you guys do have them, but do keep them. Okay, we're going to be using the C-scores we have been using. But now let me introduce you guys to the T table. So we had the C-score. Now we're going to be looking for the T-score. Right, it's a different score. We're going to be using it later. Now here at the bottom, you guys see percentages. So that's going to help us a little. I know my alpha, we have them up here. If it is a one tail, you guys can see the alphas there. If it's a two tail, so you guys can see it. Now, let's take a look. Our assignments for today is going to be pretty simple. I know this table looks a little hard. We're going to learn how to use it to begin with, but we're going to be because we're going to be using this later on. So today, don't be like, well, Mr. Leonzo, what's crazy? What's wrong with you, Mr. Leonzo? Today's work is pretty simple. It is. It is going to be simple. I just want you guys to know how to read this table. Later on, we're going to look at more depth into it. So let's take a look at my example for today. There's a pair difference experimented that yield ND paired of observations. In each case, what is the rejection region for testing? My null hypothesis is that the mean is 2, and I'm going to compare it with, so I'm going to go against the alternate hypotheses. It says that the mean is greater than 2 because I'm using the sign greater than. So I have a one tail thing here, one tailed region. If I had the or not equal to, then I'm looking at the two tail. Okay, so looking at the inequality, I know I'm looking at the one tail region. So here it says my degrees of freedom, ND, that basically means degrees of freedom, is going to be 10 here. And my alpha is 0.05. Okay, now one thing on the table, I'm going to look at my degrees of freedom that I'm going to be looking for. So for me to use this table, I'm going to use the number given minus 1. So in this case, I'm going to be using the degrees of freedom of 9. Okay, so from 10, I subtract 1. So always got to subtract 1. And I'm going to say my number that I have here that I need is degrees of freedom of 9. And my alpha is still going to be 0.05. I'm looking at a one tail, 0.05. So, but before I look at my number from the table, I'm going to say, okay, so my t, my value t, because of this sign, I'm going to say it has to be greater than, and now let me find my number. Okay, so my alpha is 0.05. I'm looking at one tail. My degrees of freedom that I'm going to be using is 9. So I see they intersect at this value right here. Do you guys see that? My alpha that I'm using again is one tail because it has the inequality sign. If it had the equal sign, I would be looking at two tail. Let me emphasize the alpha, you guys see it twice. The 0.05, you see it twice. It does matter which one are you guys using because I have an inequality sign that I'm using the one tail off. Okay, so according to my table here, it is 1.833. So let me come back to my answer here. And it's 1.833. I read the instructions, round to 3 decimal places as needed. Oh, I already have it at 3 decimal places. So I'm good. I'm good to go. Okay, now example number B. My degrees of freedom, when I use the chart, the degrees of freedom when I use is 23. Because I have inequality in all of my questions, I'm gonna go T is greater than, and I'm using the one tail for all my cases. Now my alpha is 0.10 and my degrees of freedom is 23. Okay, so let's see alpha 0.10. One tail. So there it is. My degrees of freedom is 23. And I see they meet right there. So that's 1.319. Okay, so I'm good to go here. I'm gonna say T has to be greater than 1.319. Okay, so let's take a look at part C. My degrees of freedom, I'm gonna use 6. Because remember, I always subtract 1. So my degrees of freedom are 6. My alpha is 0.025. Okay. Where is 0.025? Oh, it's right here. My alpha. My degrees of freedom, I said it was going to be 6. So they meet right there. You see that? Okay. So I'm going to say my T has to be greater than 2.447. Lastly, let's take a look. Degrees of freedom are 7. There's always one less. My alpha 0.01. I'm not going to go up. I'm not going to change the screen to the table, but you guys should have this notes printed. So my alpha is 0.01. My degrees of freedom are 7. If you use the table up there, you should see the number 2.998. Okay, so my T is greater than 2.998. We're finding the region of rejection. Okay, so again, our homework for today will be pretty simple. We're going to be using this table for our lecture for tomorrow. So that's why I needed you guys to know how to use this table.